Okay, ji. Assalamu alaikum. So now we continue with the revision of the next topic of general anatomy, a very important one, that is osteology. Now, what exactly is osteology? How do you define osteology? Osteology is study which deals with bones, not only bones and cartilages both, because in some part of your skeleton is cartilages and some part is bone. So that is the study is called bone, yeah, osteology. Then what is human skeleton? That is bone and cartilage. It is bilaterally symmetrical. That is, your skeleton is the same on both the sides, that you have equal demarcation or equal presentation. That is the limbs, upper limb, lower limb, same structures which are there, which is bilaterally, so it is symmetrical with the typical vertebrate pattern that is in the center. The axis or the central portion is typically the vertebrate, the way you have it in the animals, or that is the vertebra which are there. They are not a rigid structure. They are having a flexibility. That is, joints are there so that they can move. Then you have two pairs of limbs on this upper and the lower limb, that is pectoral and the pelvic girdle. They are also not stiff or rigid. They are also having joints which allow motion. And then skull is expanded upper portion, cranial end of the axis. So it is a bilaterally symmetrical skeleton with the axis in the center and two pairs of limbs on either side. So that is the common pattern which is there. This is the structure of the human skeleton. You can see that on both the sides, the limbs, their bones are the same. In the lower limb, they are the same. The upper end is the skull, and then you have the vertebrate pattern in the center. There are certain terms which have been used as the endoskeleton, where it is covered, the bones are covered by the muscles. It is the exoskeleton, as in insects. The bone is on the outer side. And then there is branchial skeleton, that is a skeleton that arises, bony structures for hyoid, mandible, maxilla. They arise from a certain portion, what is called the branchial apparatus, that is at the level of the pharynx. There you have certain arches that develop, and these bones, they develop from that part. So they have labeled it as a separate component. Then skeletal system, it is divided into two functional components. One is the axial skeleton, which consists of the head, cranial, neck, the trunk. That is all what is there in the center. And appendicular skeleton, which is the upper limb and the lower limb, both including different bones. And then the skeleton, what is the composition? It is cartilages and bones. Cartilages are resilient. It is a semi-rigid structure of connective tissue. Bone and cartilage are both connective tissue. You must have studied it by now in the histology, so you know what is connective tissue. Four basic tissues, that is the epithelium, connective tissue, bone, the muscular tissue, and the blood vessels and the nervous tissue. These are the basic tissues which in different ratios they are placed in different parts of the body. So connective tissue is also, specialized connective tissue is labeled as cartilage and bone. So cartilage is a semi-rigid structure of connective tissue, and it is flexibility is present. Bone is a living tissue, highly hard form of connective tissue that makes up most of the skeleton. At certain parts you have the cartilages, and at certain parts you have the bone. So now what is cartilage? Is a form of connective tissue in which there are cells, fibers, and embedded. Now there are three components of the connective tissue: cells, fibers, and the gel-like matrix in which these cells and fibers, they are floating. And the cartilage on the outside is covered by something what we call as the perichondrium. It covers the cartilage. Then we have three types of cartilages. That is the hyaline cartilage, which is present in the long bones, where you have your epiphyseal cartilage. This cartilage also covers, there are certain sites, that is at the costal cartilage and in front of the ribs. Then there is the cartilage which is on the surface of the joints, where you have the articular surfaces. There also it is there. This is cannot be repaired, and it can be ossified. This is the features of the hyaline cartilage. I will not go into the histological structure of these, because you will be studying in histology. I'm just giving you a broad outline. Then is the other type is the fibrocartilage. As the name says, it has plenty of fibrous material in it. The matrix is small in number. It is found in your intervertebral discs, which are there. Then there are the discs, which are the temporomandibular joints, sternoclavicular. That is wherever you find a disc-like structure of the cartilage, that is fibrocartilage type, and in the knee joint. And these discs have a poor blood supply. They do not repair when they are damaged. Then this is, you can see plenty of fibers. Then you have the elastic fibers. As the name says, you have plenty of elastic fibers in it. This gives you the elasticity. It is seen in the auricle of the ear, the external auditory meatus, auditory tube, and the epiglottis. These are examples of the elastic cartilage. See plenty of elastic fibers in the background that gives its name as the elastic cartilage. Then is bone. What is bone? Bone is the highly vascularized, mineralized connective tissue because it has plenty of blood supply and it has plenty of minerals. That is why we describe it as highly vascularized and mineralized connective tissue. The majority of the cells, they are embedded in the extracellular matrix. Now, what exactly is matrix is, we said connective tissue, basic components of connective tissue are the cells, fibers, and the ground substance. But when you collectively talk about fibers and ground substance, we label it as matrix. So cells and matrix is if a short hand for the components of the connective tissue. So majority of the cells, they are embedded in this extracellular matrix, which is having both organic and inorganic components. Bone is resists stress, it supports the body, it resists stress and provide leverage, or it provides a support for leverage for the movement. So these are the three basic functions. It provides supports the body, it resists stress, and it provides leverage when the joints are moving. These are the parts of a long bone. If you see, the central part is the diaphysis. The upper part, the extreme upper end, is the epiphysis, and where the epiphysis meets the epiphysis meets the metaphysis, that is the diaphysis, that small area is called the metaphysis. So three basic parts: epiphysis, the upper extreme and the lower extreme. Middle, the long body, is the shaft, and then where the epiphysis and the diaphysis meet, that is the metaphysis. This picture also shows you other parts. You have the spongy bone, then you have the marrow cavities, which is the inside, but it is basically your epiphysis, diaphysis, and the metaphysis. That is again showing you that. And in the center, you have the medullary cavity. What is the composition of bone? You have two components, organic and inorganic. Organic is the connective tissue, that is the fibers and all, they provide you the flexibility. If these fibers are removed, the bone stays hard because your inorganic component is still there, and but it loses its elasticity and it's prone to fracture because it becomes hard. And then inorganic is your minerals which are there. These provide the hardness and the rigidity. So if you remove it by the chemicals, the inorganic material is removed, the hardness is not going to be supported. Your bone is going to become soft and brittle and inelastic, and it's going to be flexible, and it can break away easily because the material which provides it hardness and which gives it support is gone by the decalcification. So these are the two components of the bone, organic and inorganic in the ground substance, which provide different functions. Organic gives it flexibility. Organic is your connective tissue, fiber, cells, all that. Inorganic is the salts which are there. So when you remove the salts, the bone becomes hard and it crumbles easily because it becomes very friable. Then, what are the types of bones which are there? There are two types of bones. There is a compact bone, and its texture is dense. And then there is a trabecular bone, that is their small septa, which is, and there are spaces in it. You can say a sponge with spaces in it, these small bony trabeculae, and in that they have large cavities. This is called cancellous bone or spongy bone. And so there are two types. Compact is with a dense bony structure, and whereas the spongy is trabecular or cancellous bone. They are going to be distinguished. How do you separate them? By the relative amount of the solid matter which is there and its number of the spaces they contain. So according to that, if that bone structure is very compactly arranged, it's going to be called a dense bone or a compact structure. And if they are just septa or trabeculae, and then they have a lot of spaces in it, that is called be the trabeculae or the cancellous bone. If you see this outer surface, and that is this wall, if you see where you have these red lines, that is the cortex, that is supports the bony structure. You can see that the lamellae which are there, or the Haversian systems which form the bony structure, they are arranged very compactly and tightly with each other. Whereas on the inner surface, you see that they are bony septa, but there are large spaces in it. So outside you see that is the compact bone, and inner side these with the big holes, that is the spongy bone. If you see in this again, there's these spicules which are there, they are going to give you the bony structure, but this bony structure is not compact. It is having a big spaces in it. That is the cancellous or the spongy bone. And if you see on the outside of this cancellous or the spongy bone, you can see that they are compact and the arrangement is tightly present and densely present. So histologically, if you see this, this is a histology of compact bone, and this is compact bone, and this is of the spongy bone. The two, okay, you can see that it is mainly containing spaces having the fat in it or the blood cells, and then small septa which are formed by the bone tissue. And this is your just the compact bone. You can see the Haversian system, which is the basic component of the bone, is very firmly and tightly placed. Then another structure in the bone is the marrow cavity. All bones have thin superficial layers of compact bone around this. You see this compact bone around the central mass, which is the spongy bone you see in this picture, and then which is replaced at certain places in the center, which is called your medullary or the marrow cavity. In the medullary or the cavity of the bone, that is the marrow cavity. This is occupied by a red marrow or yellow marrow. Red marrow is because it is concerned with the formation of the blood cells. So that is why it is called the red marrow. But when these blood cells finish off with their function, they are occupied with the fat, and that is why it is called the yellow marrow. And it can be a combination of both. During early stages of development, it is red marrow, but when their function is given off, that is shifted on to a yellow marrow, and the red marrow is only replaced onto the ends of the long bones and in other certain flat bones. But when there is an emergency, then more cells have to, red blood cells have to be made. Again, this yellow marrow converts into the red marrow. So that is the central marrow cavity. Then what is the microstructure of the bone? That is, it is extracellular. Then you have 60 to 70% the inorganic uh, component, and 30% is the collagen, that is the organic component. Then you have cells in it, osteoblasts, osteocytes, osteoclasts, and osteoprogenitor cells. Osteoprogenitor cells, they are those cells which convert into the bone cells. So blast cells are the immature cells, when they are formed, they are called the osteocytes, and the bone destroying or the remodeling cells, they are the osteoclasts. And then the bone has a portion which is the endosteum. Endosteum is something which is lining the marrow cavity, and periosteum is something which is on the outer side of the bone. That is where you have the compact bone. And in the center, what you see is the marrow cavity. Functions, it gives shape and support, lever of locomotion, it is interchange reserve house for calcium, it is what protects the organs where you form the thorax and the skull, it is the mineral homeostasis, that is again because of its calcium and phosphorus. Then there is bone marrow, red and yellow bone marrow, that is what I have told you. Pneumatic bones, there are certain bones which contain air spaces. It is said that they produce lightening of the skull, that is the skull becomes light because of that, and also it provides resonance to the voice. This is just a post function, it's not exactly known. They assist in function, that is in the respiratory movements of the rib cage or the ribs, that is going to help in respiration. The hormonal formation, osteocalcin, also is a function of the bone. Speech, palate and mandible, they, by the movement of these, they produce the speech. WBCs are the defense mechanism cells, which are also produced by the bone. So this is classification of bones. First basic way is to classify bones is by developmental classification. How are they produced? There are three ways. It can either be just from the membrane, it becomes the bone structure, so that would be called as intramembranous, or it can change from the bone membrane to cartilage, and from cartilage then onto the bone, so that would be called the intracartilaginous type of ossification. And membranocartilaginous is a combination of both the types of ossification or formation. Then you can classify them according to the evolution, whether it was exoskeleton, endoskeleton, then how it converted. The bones can be classified because there are still certain bones which are exo and endoskeleton. Then you can classify bones according to the region. There can be axial, which lie in the center, that is the skull, somatic, ribs, sternum, appendicular bones, that is of the upper limb and the lower limb. And then you have those visceral, or what we call from the pharyngeal apparatus. Those bones which are the hyoid bone, ear ossicles, mandible and styloid, which I told you before. So that is according to the region because they lie in the level of the pharynx. So this is regional. Then according to the structure, you have a compactly arranged, it's going to be called the compact bone. And if it is loosely, that is the trabeculae, and then you have the spaces in it, it's going to be called the spongy bone. Then according to the shape and the size, there are different bones. We have long bones, which have a shaft, and the upper and the lower ends, they are, you see from this picture, they have a epiphysis on the above and below, and they have the diaphysis on above. Then you have these short bones or miniature long bones. These short bones, they are your phalanges, metacarpals or metatarsals. These have shaft, but epiphysis is just present on one end. That is, those are the short bones, but miniature short bones. That is of the hand. These are the short bones, or the also called the miniature short long bones, because they resemble the structure of long bone, but they have the epiphysis on one side. Then you have short bones, that these are which no diaphysis or tubular structure is there. Then you have these bones of the carpal and the metacarpal bones. These are your carpus, tarsal, cuboid, cuneiform. These are short bones. Then you have flat bones, which have two plates, one on top of the other, and then you have a space in between. If you see in this picture, sternum is a good example, skull bones are a good example. That is the flat bone. Then you have bones, irregular bones which do not fit into any category, and these are labeled as your vertebrae. These are irregular. So you have long bones, you have miniature long bones, you have short bones, and then you have these flat bones, and then you have these irregular bones. They are all according to the shape. Then you can classify them as miscellaneous classification. This miscellaneous classification is going to be different because they do not fit into any. One is a sesamoid bone. At certain bones, they develop in the tendons. They are called the sesamoid bones. Then you have pneumatic bones. Those are which contain air spaces in it and they're present in the skull. They are called as the pneumatic bones. Then you have accessory bones. There are certain, when you have, instead of 5, you have 6 fingers. That is, they are called as accessory bones or supernumerary bones. Hermian bones are those which develop in the sutures, bones which develop. Heterotrophic, certain scars, they give rise to ossification and then develop into bones. So these are classified or grouped according to various reasons. That is why we call them as the based upon the miscellaneous classification. Then we said, according to the ossification, we can classify. They are the bones with the single center, which appears in the diaphysis, primary center. Bones with many centers, they can be grouped as separate. So you can have a one which just ossifies completely with the single center, and those with many centers. The primary center appears in the intrauterine life. In the diaphysis, it is the typical centers. And atavistic primary centers, 2 or more primary centers, individual parts, and then they fuse to one another and they form the bone. That is what we call as atavistic. That is, primary centers, instead of 1, it appears as 2, and then they ossify and they fuse together. Then you have the secondary centers which appear after birth, and they can be in different epiphyses, or they appear in the ends of the bones, that is in the epiphysis. They can be of different types because of its different reasons. Where types of epiphysis is pressure epiphysis, pressure of the adjacent structures, you develop bone. Then because of the traction, when your muscles are attached, pull of those muscles makes the bone to develop. Atavistic is separate, that means evolutionary separate between bones and animals, the medical end of the clavicle. Then you can have aberrant, usually present at one side, metatarsal. Formed are multiple secondary epiphyses, and then these multiple secondary epiphyses, they fuse together, the composite, and that is a combination. So you can have multiple types of epiphyses. That is, the secondary forms in 2 or 3 ways. That is why it is given the name as epiphysic. Then is ossification. Bone formation is also called the ossification process by a new bone is produced. It starts in the third month in human and it is completed by the adult life. The cells die out and they are replaced, the cartilage cells, they die out and they are replaced by the bone cells in the ossification centers. That is basically the mechanism which is there in the ossification. What are the laws of ossification? Primary center, that is, which appears before birth, is single and it appears in the shaft. Secondary centers may be more, one or more, appears after birth, and they appears at the epiphysis, that is at the ends of the long bone. And there is an exception, that is the lower end of the femur. This bone of the lower limb, this has an appearance of the secondary center at the lower end, that is in the epiphysis at the 9 month of intrauterine life. This is a medical legal significance point because this appears before birth and that is the secondary center. And if it appears before birth, then you can assess the age of the baby if the exact age of the baby is not known and the baby, a stillborn, that is a dead baby, is born, whether to assess, they say that it was a premature baby or it was not a full-term baby. Then they, to assess the age of the baby, if the secondary center has appeared in the lower end of the femur, then they know it that it is a 9 month baby and he would have survived if born. So it might be a case whether it's really a stillborn or it has been murdered after birth. So that is the importance of this secondary center, a medico-legal significance. Then when there is ossification, those centers which appear first, they are last to ossify. That means they are there, but they continue growing on. So these centers are especially present where at that time where the bone growth is going on, the length of the bone is going to grow on. That is why it is called the growing end. So that center, diaphysis, which appears in the lower end or in the upper end, that is the first one, and then it is going to fuse last. That is where that end is going to be called the growing end. Then the direction of the nutrient artery which supplies the blood to the bone, that is entering into the bone in the diaphysis through the nutrient foramen, and its direction is opposite to that of the growing end. The secondary centers fuse together, they form a single epiphysis and then they turn fuse with the diaphysis. So these are all the different laws which are followed in the ossification. Then there is, if it becomes bone, what are the basic steps? Hypertrophication, that is the chondrocytes, because it is a cartilage bone structure, it becomes cartilaginous cells, they grow and then they are calcified. Cartilage matrix becomes, by the deposition of the salts, it becomes hard. This creates the death of the chondrocytes, and then these death of the chondrocytes leads into cavities in the bone, and then the periosteal bud, that is the periosteal artery, it invades, nutrients are delivered to the bone via the blood vessels and nerves also enter, and then it develops the formation of the osteocytes goes on. So basically when it is intracartilaginous ossification, first the cartilage cells die off and then they are replaced by the bony cells. Intramembranous is just 4 steps. That is where you have the membranous portion. There a small point is going to be labeled as the ossification center. The groups, the cells they group as, and the ossification center forms. These cells produce a immature sort of a bone matrix, that is what is called the osteoid. When this osteoid is formed, it traps or encloses the the cells which are there. They are not supplied by nutrition, which then becomes they are dead, and then they are replaced by the osteocytes, trabecular matrix, and the periosteum is formed. So that is exactly in that you have the change from the cartilage to the bone. In this, it's direct from the membrane to the bone. This would be again taught to you when you do histology, bones histology. See in this picture. There is ossification. What is the help of ossification? It helps in the growth of the bones. As I told you, laws of ossification is important, blood direction, and clinical and medical legal. I told you by this, if it is completely ossified, the epiphysis and the diaphysis of a certain bone That is a certain fixed time period. With that, we assess the age of the person. So that is why it is helpful in clinical and medical legal aspects. What all can affect your ossification: age, sex. It's the female ossification starts about 2 years earlier and closes even 2 years earlier than the males. That is why this is called as the female ossification antedates the male. That is, their time period is earlier. Genetic constitution, races, nutrition, muscular activities, joint movement, and general health. All these factors, they affect your ossification. Then is the growing end hypothesis. I told you that end which has the ossification center. First to appear is last to ossify, except fibula is an exception. So this is the end which is having the first center to appear. That means the growth starts first and it closes later on. That is why the growth is going to continue at that, and that is what we call as the growing end. Nutrient for the nutrient foramina, that is said to be reversed. It grows in the upper direction. Anthropometry. What is anthropometry? Is the study of the bodily proportions, study of the bodily proportions and dimensions. So that is for these study of or research purposes. There are two ways that you can study different sex, different races. One is non-metrical, that is presence or absence of the feature, not without measuring anything. It's just whether certain parts are present or not. And metrical is by the measurement, the length or the diameter of that structure. So these two ways you assess and you trace the races of these human beings. Estimation of skeletal age or sex is basically till 25 years, till the teeth and the ossification, because you know that the age of ossification is fixed. So with that you assess that because at 25 years old, these long bones, they're ossified. After that, the sutures are the basic way of measuring the age, because they ossify slightly later and the bony surface is late teens to 50. So with that, if the sutures are ossified, then you can assess the age. Then the sex, they also helpful in the, you know that the after puberty, the pelvis, even in infancy and fetal line, different in case of sex, where male and female, they have certain differences, certain bones are helpful. Then estimation of size and race, height, for the measurement of the limbs, femoral bone is used for the height of the person. Race, yes, certain data, that is anthropometry, is used. Then the growth of the bone, that is again the ossification, primary center, diaphysis before birth, epiphysis, secondary center after birth. And then we said females antedate the males and they are going to be collective together. And so the uh, time period is going to help in the growth of the body bone. If you see these are the not the fractures, there is a discontinuity in different parts of the bones. These are showing you the epiphyseal cartilages, that is the epiphyseal plates, which are still ossifying, they're not complete. So with the help of these on X-ray, you can assess whether the ossific age of the person. If it is a medical legal case, you take an X-ray and the X-ray is going to show what the age of the person is. People try to hide the true age of a person because it is the juveniles, they have less of punishment in the court, so they try to make the age as less as possible. But this helps when there is epiphyseal cartilage or the ossifications of the bones, that helps to tell what the age of the person is. Okay, so this is not fractures, it is that they are still not ossified completely. Then the lines of arrested growth, that because of some problem or some disease, these ossification of the bones cannot be seen smoothly or completely. When in the epiphyseal plate, you see irregularities. That is what is called the lines of arrested growth, and that is because of the diseased time period led by the person. So that would be called as, so as you see in a smooth epiphyseal cartilage, you will not see it in the lines of arrested growth. That means it is a time period, the ossification is going to be stopped, and then again, so after a certain time, it's going to start again. So this is times of arrested growth. That means you have certain white lines horizontally, and they tell you that the ossification because of the disease has not gone on too smoothly, and that is shown in these epiphyseal plates that is called the epiphyseal cartilage, the lines of arrested growth. Okay, although the blood supply, the most important one, is not active all the time, but it has profuse blood supply. The blood, although is not active, the blood supply is profuse. The arteries which supply blood is nutrient artery system, metaphyseal and epiphyseal arterial system, and periosteal. These are the four types of vessels which supply blood to these bones. The nutrient artery, as you see in the center, this is going to enter into the nutrient foramina, and then when it enters into the nutrient foramina into the bone marrow, there it is going to divide into an ascending and a descending branch. And then these ascending and descending branch reach up till the level of the metaphysis. There it is going to anastomose if the ossification has taken place. Then it's going to anastomose with the epiphyseal vessels which are going to be there on the epiphysis. And it also sends branches onto the outside, that is to the peripheral part of the cortical bone. Then if you see in this, this is dividing. And in the cortex, they're going to give branches extending longitudinally. Some are going to go into the marrow upward. Some are going to go towards the periphery, and they're going to ossify with the periosteal bones. This bone, these bones, the nutrient bones, they supply the inner 2/3 of the mature bones. So the nutrient artery which enters inside, it supplies to the 2/3 structure of the bone. Then is the metaphyseal vessels. Metaphysis, if you know the area, is just between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. So the vessels from the neighboring area, if you can see, this has been labeled, they come and reinforce the branches of the primary nutrient artery. So they ossify. And if there is articular cartilage is still there, there is not going to be a penetration of these metaphyseal vessels to the epiphyseal one. So they will only anastomose. You see in this picture, they will only anastomose with the uh, epiphyseal arteries after the epiphyseal cartilage is finished off. Then if you see these epiphyseal arteries, they permit, they have openings that permit large vessels in the epiphysis. They are going to enter from there and to the ossification centers. These plates is where receives nutrition from two sources. One is by these vessels and the other is by diffusion. So, and the metaphyseal vessels that supply zone of the provisional calcification. Then in young children, epiphyseal vessels are separated from the metaphyseal vessels. Following growth arrest of the cartilage base, there is an anastomosis between the epiphyseal vessel, metavein, terminal branches of the nutrient artery. Obliteration of epiphyseal blood vessel supply necrosis deprives the cartilage cells of the growth rate for their nutrition. So epiphyseal blood supply results in necrosis of the epiphysis, that is your cartilage which is between the two parts of the diaphysis and the epiphysis. These are the bones, they drain and they pass out same way as it is in the arteries. The blood flow has two concepts. One is your centripetal and the other is your centrifugal flow. Centripetal is that which is directed inwards. So that is the supply which is going on from these nutrient arteries, and that is directed inwards. That is centripetal. And centrifugal is something which is directed away. Those branches which from the inside they are directed outwards to the cortex of the bone, that is supply is called the centrifugal supply. The periosteal vessels on the outside, they also send branches towards the inside, so that is also a centripetal flow. So there are two concepts, that the bone is having both a centrifugal and a centripetal flow. If you see this there, the blood vessels, some are going inwards and some are going from the inward vessel. They are directed outwards and supplying to the periphery and anastomosing with the periosteal artery. So that is centrifugal flow, and centrally directed branches of centripetal. That is your periosteal branches from the outside. They're going to supply blood which is directed inward. So, and those from the inwards, that is the nutrient arteries, they also go and branch and they supply blood from inwards towards the outer direction. Those are called your centrifugal arteries. If you see in this picture, this is artery which is running in parallel in the marrow cavity. This is giving blood supply to the inner structure. That is called the centripetal flow. And this is then certain small vessels, they arise and they supply to the outer side of the cortex. And that is there called your centrifugal flow. You see these. Then the nutrient artery through the foramen giving ascending and descending edges show traces of metacase of a dull bone anastomose with the epiphyseal metaphyseal. The nutrient artery in this way nourishes the whole medullary cavity and the inner two-thirds of the cortex as well as the metaphysis. I'll show you a diagram above. If you see this, this is the nutrient artery which is entering the main artery, that is the artery which is entering into it, and then it is dividing into an ascending and a descending branch. Principal nutrient artery, ascending and a descending branch. This is then going to supply. These are the three parts of the cortex. That is the inner two-thirds and the outer one-third. Then this gives supplies to the marrow cavity and then gives certain branches which are derived from the outside, they're directed outwards. There, they are going to supply to the inner two-thirds of the cortex. And then from the outside, this is centrifugal directed blood flow. And then from the periosteal arteries, if you see number 3, they are directed inwards and they're just supplying to the outer one-third of the cortex. So these are centripetal vessels. So that is how it is supplied. That means the bone is being supplied by the nutrient artery which enters to the nutrient foramina. Ascending and descending branches are given. It supplies branches or anastomosis with the epiphyseal and the diaphyseal vessels, and then it gives off to the long bone marrow cavity, and then it gives off branches on towards the arterioles to the outer side, that is the centrifugal branches, which are going to supply to the outer the inner two-thirds of the bone cortex of the bone. This is the full thickness cortex, and this has been divided, so you can see it very clearly in this picture. And then the periosteal arteries, they are entering from the outside, supplying to the periosteum. That is the outer one-third of the cortex. They are supplied by the periosteum. So two-thirds by the nutrient artery and one-third is by the periosteal arteries. Then you have the metaphysis. Metaphysis is that part which is going to be supplied by its metaphyseal arteries. And then this is going to anastomose with the diaphyseal vessels. If the articular cartilage there, once the articular cartilage is finished, bone growth is finished, there is no barrier in between. The metaphyseal vessels are going to anastomose with the epiphyseal as well. So both are supplying to that area. And epiphysis is supplied by the epiphyseal arteries, which are coming from the blood vessels surrounding it. So supply the outer one-third. Then the epiphyseal arteries derive from the periarticular vascular arcades, and then you have the metaphyseal, which are from the surrounding vessels. So this is the exact picture that is giving you the blood supply. So if you see in this picture, the nutrient artery is entering. It's dividing into ascending and descending branches, reaching up till the epiphyseal cartilage plate because it cannot cross. So it's just going to go till the metaphysis. Then periosteal vessels from the outside, they are centripetally divided and they are entering into the cortex. And in the cortex, they're going to supply to the one-third vessel. And then you have the epiphyseal artery that is going to supply to the epiphysis. And once the articular cartilage is finished off, and metaphysis and epiphysis will be anastomosis between the epiphyseal and metaphyseal after the fusion. So blood supply of bone is a very important topic because it's very significant. Immature long bones, miniature, the other bones, they're basically supplied by the periosteal vessels, diaphyseal vessels, epiphyseal vessels. All these, they supply, and the metaphyseal, they supply different bones. The flat bones by the periosteal, short bones by the nutrient arteries, so different vessels. Basically, there are 4 groups of vessels which are going to supply it. Nerves, periosteum is richly supplied with nerve supply, so that is why when there is fracture of the periosteum on the outside, it is highly painful. This is rickets and osteomalacia when there is a normal bone, and when there is osteoporotic, that is when there is salts or lack. Fracture, when the bone is fractured, it's going to be cut. First, you have a formation of the immature callus, that is a small amount of cartilage, mucous membranous tissue is formed, that is called the collar of a cartilage at the place holding the two bones together. Then there is remodeling of this cartilage, and then you have the healed, new formed bone. Then we go on to the myology, the different types of bones, which are muscles, which are there. What is myology? Is the study of muscles. It is one of the mechanical effector systems which the body contractile in nature, which produces the movement. We have different types of structures which are contractile. Macrophages, leukocytes, they can move cilia, flagella. Those are your modifications on the surface. They can move mitotic apparatus, that is when the meiosis and mitosis occurs. How do these spindles move apart? Myoepithelial cells again shows you the myosin and actin. These contract, myofibroblasts, all these words which say myo is meant that it is containing your myosin and actin filament. So these are all which have the contractile property. But characteristic of muscles is their excitability, it is contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. All these features are there. What do the muscles do? There is movement. By the contraction of the muscles, they maintain this posture and then heat production. That is the muscles in the blood vessels by the contraction, but relaxation, they increase and decrease the size. So that is the function of the muscles. Smooth muscles, we have three types of muscles: smooth, skeletal, and cardiac muscle. Smooth muscle is also called non-striated because you do not see striations in them. It is plain and it is involuntary. It's not under your control. This is the smooth muscle, which is spindle shaped, having tapering ends, nucleus single, present in the center. And these are not attached to bones. They are mostly present in the organs of the body, and they're supplied by the autonomic nervous system, and they're not under your control. They are automatic in functioning. You see this smooth spindle shaped fibers. This again is detail you will study in histology. The cardiac muscle found in the heart and the blood vessels. It contains of an intrinsic network of branching cells with again one nucleus in the center. But this cardiac muscle shows you striations, light and dark bands, the way your skeletal muscle shows, and it has abundant blood supply because it needs plenty of work all the time. So it has plenty of mitochondria for providing the ATP. You see this, these are all, and then they are related. They are connected to each other by certain gap junctions, which are called your intercalated discs. That you see these lines as pinkish. That is, once the impulse starts from one end, it is going to travel through all these fibers via these intercalated junctions. Then there is a muscle dyad. This is how does there are two components of the muscle dyad. One is your T tubule that is produced by the inversion of this cell membrane, and the other is your green, that is your sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is on just on one side. So combination of these two structures, that is T tubule and the sarcoplasmic reticulum together, they provide two structures, and that is what we call as muscle dyad. This is when the impulse reaches the muscle periphery, this releases the impulse inside so that there is depolarization and it reaches to the center and the muscles can contract. That is exactly the function of muscle dyad. Dyads are present in the connective tissue, cardiac muscle. Then you have the skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is developmentally again by the myocytes. These myocytes, they fuse together, and when they fuse together and the tubules on the outside, they give you formation that is the plenty of these nuclei. It is cylindrical, and these nuclei, they form myotubes, which are not formed by the other cells. They are just forming by the fusion of different myocytes. Myocytes are the basic cells which are going to form the muscle fiber. These fuse together, and that is why you see the muscle placed, nuclei placed at the periphery. Now this is muscle is a cylindrical shaped fiber. It has plenty of nuclei which are multinucleated, and they are placed periphery. That is just next to your cell membrane, just at the level of this cell membrane. That is by the formation of tubes. When many cell fibers they unite together, they form these myotubes, and this myotubes gives rise to this cylindrical in shape, and they are multinucleated fibers. They run in groups. They are covered by the innermost one fiber is covered by endomysium. Then they run in bundles. These bundles they're covered by the perimysium, and then this is all connective tissue. And when there are many group of fasciculi bundles run together. They are covered by the epimysium. And then the tubules, actin and myosin filaments, they are arranged in staggered pattern. And then they give you this sarcomere appearance, which is the contractile unit. So you see sarcolemma is the outside, that is the covering. The way you had plasma lemma of the any cell, in this way sarco, when you use the word, it is specification that it is of the muscle fiber. So it is called the sarcolemma, and sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm of the cell, muscle cell. And this shows you cross striations, which there is overlapping, and sarcoplasm has myoglobin, which is concerned with the activity of the muscles. Now, in this case, the skeletal muscle, that just shows you a triad. That means where there is invagination, this pink one of the T tubules, that is going to have, if you see on this, on either sides, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That means two sarcoplasmic reticulum, that this green structure on either side and with one T tubule in the center. So this why it is called the muscle triad. The function is the same, that is to depolarize the whole of the muscle at the same time. It was dyad in the cardiac muscle and it is triad in the skeletal muscle. You see this, the striations that you see. So there are three types of red muscle fibers: red fibers, white fibers, and intermediate fibers. Red fibers, they're small diameter, and they're said to be slow in twitch. That is the way your rectus spinae, which maintains your posture. It can keep contracted slowly, gradually, and keep your body erect. Somewhere you need a quick response of the muscles. That is, the diameter is less, and that is where you have these white fibers, that is called the fast twitch. The way it is when you blink your eyes, that is a quick response. The twitch is there. Then the hand movements, that is, all these, they show you the fast twitch muscles. Those are, your diameter is less, and myoglobin and mitochondria are less, because their activity is going to be quick and finished. Whereas in the red fibers, it is going to be a slow activity and prolonged one. So plenty of the diameter and abundant myoglobin, that is, which contains the oxygen. An intermediate one, mostly in the body, we have a mixed one of types. They are present mostly intermediate types. Sarcomere is the contracting unit which is there. Then how is the muscle arranged? The muscle is arranged levels. First, outside is the whole muscle. And the muscle, and if you take a section, this muscle is going to be in bundles. That is called the fasciculi. These fasciculi are going to have your myofibrils in it. Many collection of myofibrils. And these myofibrils, when you open them up, they are going to further be formed by the myofilaments. All these are the contractile units. So the level of organization is the muscle as a whole, formed by the collection of fasciculi, the fasciculi with the myofibrils in it, and myofibrils with the myofilaments into it. So that is the breakup. Nerve supply of the muscle is attached where you have the non-active end, so that the nerve is not damaged. Blood supply, two types of circulation is given to the muscles. One is nutritive and the other is non-nutritive. This goes on to deep down till the level of the endomysium, that is where you have one muscle fiber. They're slow, and these are the nutrition, that is, they're just going to supply the nutrition, that is what going to deep down into the cell. Perimysium and the non-nutritive is that which allows blood flow and muscle caprice immediate. When the muscle contraction is there, then this is stopped, and if this is obstructed, the nutrition to the muscle fiber is going to come from the nutritive circulation. So both are going to reach till the level of the endomysium, but this is non-nutritive, so because it just helps in the function. And when the muscle contracts, this is impeded, stopped, but your nutrition does not finish to the endomysium, and that continues on to the nutritive circulation. So both types of vessels, they have different functions. Then is fascia. What is fascia? Is the muscles attached and protected by the connective tissue. There are two types of things: a fascia with the connective tissue, fibrous. It lies beneath the skin and the muscle coverings and organs. Types: the fascia is superficial fascia and deep fascia, and the other thing is the connective tissue fascia of the muscle itself. The superficial fascia is hypodermis, below the skin, different places, thickness. Outer layer is fatty, inner layer is non-fatty. It has where you have fatty, it is the energy storage which is there. At certain places, connective tissue is less. At certain places, it is so. The deep fascia, below the superficial fascia, you have the deep fascia. It invests the entire body and is well defined in the limbs and the neck. This deep fascia is going to form intermuscular septa, that is, divide the muscles into groups, into different compartments. And this also, when it contracts the muscles, it helps in the venous return. Then there are certain bands of this connective tissue formed at ankle and the wrist at the joints, which control the excessive movements of the muscle tendons. That is what we call as retinaculum. In aponeurosis, it's not necessary that all the time the muscle is inserted as a tendon. At places it is inserted as a sheath. That is called as the aponeurosis. Then the connective tissue part of the muscle is endomysium, perimysium. I have told you, endomysium is one fiber covering connective tissue. Then the bundle is covered by the perimysium, and the whole of the muscle is covered by the epimysium. And then through this, they are attached to the bone. Then there are certain lubricating mechanisms in the muscles, that is to allow to prevent friction. One is, if it is a small like sac structure, it is going to be formed the synovial bursa. And if it is a long tubular sheath like bursa, that is called the tubular bursa. It covers the tendon and it facilitates the movement of the tendon in the bursa. Then there is the classification, the most important part of the classification of the muscle. First is, according to the structure, we have classified it as smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle. These three, that is the appearance of the shape, the presence of the nuclei, and all the features. According to that, we classify it as smooth, cardiac, and skeletal muscle. Then, according to the function, voluntary and involuntary muscles which are there. Then, according to development, some develop from the mesoderm, that is the germ layer, some from the ectoderm, some from the pharyngeal portion, so all endoderm. So all these different layers, if they are development, we classify groups of muscles according to that. Then according to the colors and the contraction, as we have already talked about, that is red muscles, white muscles, and the intermediate muscles. Then according to the enzymatic activity, there are certain muscles, type A, type B, type C, which is depending on the enzymes which make it fast twitch or slow twitch. According to the history, whether these were somatic arising from the organs, whether they were from peripheral portion, whether they were gradually how they went on into development and all what changes occurred where these muscles start to develop and where gradually they were changed. So that is all historical modifications of the origin of the muscles. Then extent of the muscles, there are certain extrinsic and intrinsic muscles. Extrinsic muscles are those which have the both ends which are outside the organ, that is their gross movements. And intrinsic muscles are small. They are attached in the same region. That if it is eye muscle, they are going to be the origin and the insertion both lie inside the eye. That is what is called as the intrinsic muscles, and if the end the attachment is outside the eye, it's going to be called the extrinsic muscle. These intrinsic muscles are said to produce more fine movement. So wherever you have fine small muscles of the hand, the eye, the tongue, you have group of intrinsic muscles. In the tongue, you have in the eye, you have these small hand muscles because they produce finer movements, because the energy is not wasted for a long period. According to the architecture, you can have three parameters. You can classify how that the muscle mass, what is the length and the diameter. You can classify muscles according to that, the length and the fiber of the angle. You can say, then you can have the force and the power that depends on the area of the bone by which it is attached. So these three features, that is power or force, you can classify the range of the contraction and force and power depending on the muscle mass. This is again by the area of the bone by its attachment, then on the muscle mass, how much it is attached to bone, and then what is the length and the fiber of the muscle. That gives you the architectural classification. If you see this, there are different types of muscles which are there according to the shape and according to the attachment. Line of pull, it is, you can see they are parallel muscle fibers. This can be a shape is quadrilateral, then it can be a strap like, then this strap with tendinous intersections, that is the interruption, and then this fusiform. But the direction of the fibers is vertical in one direction. Then these are the oblique ones, that is you have these triangular, two bellies, digastric, and two-headed So you have these bicipital muscles, tricipital, three-headed, triangular, fan-shaped muscles, circular, or the orbicularis ocular muscle. These are all oblique. They are not vertical in direction, but the muscle the fibers are in different directions. Then you have these pinnate muscles or circumpinnate. These are three in nature. One is unipinnate, that is the muscle fiber arises from one tendon, that is unipinnate. Then it is from both the sides. It arises, that is the bipinnate, if you can see in this second picture. And then it is multipinnate, that is the one tendon in the center, and the muscle is going to arise from all sides. These are the multipinnate muscles, or the you can also call them as certain muscles which go radially round. You can also call them the circumpinnate or the cylindrical muscles. So these are said to be having a quick activity, and they're more strength and more fiber, many more fibers, more powerful, less range of movement. So it is a quick and strong movement where you have these pinnate muscles. So your fingers have these multipinnate and unipinnate and bipinnate muscles, where you have your small muscles, these interossei muscles of the hand and the feet. So that is why they produce powerful movements for the grip and all that. So there you have these pinnate muscles. And these are because the birds, they're going to fly long distances, and they go on, and that is why what gives them the strength is this presence of these bipinnate arrangement of the muscles. Then there is the spiral twitch muscle, that is rotational in angle. It can be, the spiral can be cruciate, they can be 90 degrees angle, they can be 180 degrees, it can be a cruciate, that is the muscles can be in the cross shape, one belly crossing over to the other. So all these are the different ways of the attachment. Then mode of attachment, muscles can be attached directly to bone, or they can be indirectly attached. That means first attached to the aponeurosis, then or through the tendons, or through the fascia, or through the articular cartilage, through the muscular digitation, that is inserting into the other muscles, and then into the bone, indirectly to the skin, that is facial expression attached to the cartilage. So all these, they can be attached directly or indirectly to the bone. Then classification of the muscles according to the blood supply. You can see that there are different types. In this first picture, you see single vascular pedicle is supplying to whole of the muscle. That is type 2. You have two types of pedicles. One is the main bigger one, and the other is the small one. Then type 3 is two pedicles, that is supply is from two different arteries. Then fourth is by many small arteries which are supplying to the muscle. Fifth is one big one, and then many small ones which is supplied to the muscle. So according to this, you can also group the muscles, how many pedicles are supplying to the that respective muscle. Then physiological action, you can classify it, group of muscles, and that action is four terminologies I use. That is prime mover. The first prime mover is that it is the main muscle which is performing that activity. Is a muscle when it is a chief muscle or the member of a chief group of muscles responsible for an activity. That is the main movement is performed by that muscle. So if it is a flexor muscle, that is going to be the prime mover of that muscle. So that is called as prime mover. Then there's an antagonist, something which is not the main movement muscle, but it is muscle which is having action opposite to that muscle. Supposing one muscle, the main prime mover we are talking about is the flexor. The muscle which is having an opposite action, that is going to be the extensors, they're going to be the antagonist. So antagonist, any muscle that opposes the action of the prime mover. So at one time, one muscle is going to be active, either the flexor or the extensor. Both cannot be active at one time. The other has to be nullified for the main prime mover to be active. The bicep opposes the action, but before a prime mover can contract, antagonist must be relaxed. This is brought by nervous reflex innervation. That is principles of reciprocal innervation. That is prime mover contracts, nervous stimulation equal relaxation of the antagonist. That is by the inhibition. So one is going to be, that is which is performing an opposite action, has to be relaxed before the main muscle can contract. Fixator is something that is to stabilize the origin of the prime mover so it can act efficiently. That is, it contracts the fixator, or not produce any movement itself, but it fixes the muscle, and so that it is stabilizes the movement origin of the prime mover so that it can act very efficiently. And synergist is supposing the muscle passes through a long distance, That means half the strength of the muscle would be lost reaching in its final movement. So to prevent the unwanted movements in any intermediate joints, groups of muscles called these group of muscles, they nullify the unwanted movements in the way, and then they allow the main movements to occur. Those are called synergists. That is, those muscles which nullify the not wanted intermediate movements, and they allow only the one movement. Supposing you want just flexor and the muscle is passing through on top of two joints, it is going to nullify the movement with the certain muscles are going to nullify the movement at one joint, so that your pure movement is going to occur at one joint. And that was about the revision of the flexion, the muscles and the bones. I hope you have be able to recollect all what we have already done. Thank you.